question for each of you, and it's basically, when did you become aware, I guess we'll start with Jack, is when did you become aware you're focusing on food, you're focusing on techniques of the food-wine combination? When do you really start thinking about that in your training?
Pretty much from the beginning at culinary, you take a wine class and they teach you, spend a week just tasting wines, 3 hours a day,
right.
just tasting.
Very rough class.
Yeah. Oh, it's difficult. It's very difficult. And so that's where you get your first, I got my first major exposure. I mean, I've been drinking wine since I was younger, but that's where I got my exposure with how wine connected with food. And then you have to understand wine when you get to a level where you're going to add a wine to make a sauce or something. You have to know how the wine's balanced. It's very important. But I'd say the higher I went in my career, the more important it became. As I got more involved in actual menu development and writing menus, right. I'd have a feeling to work with, let's say, the manager or owner, which wines they were going to bring in, because we had to connect to make sure that the wines that you brought in would flow with the food that you had on the menu.
Right. Same same question in reverse.
The wine and food are a perfect marriage and goes back for 1,000 years. And some of the most knowledgeable people in the industry, in the wine industry, are people like Jack, chefs, because chefs usually know more about wine than just about anyone else. And it's the same, we taste food the same way we taste wine. We taste sweetness, we taste bitterness, and we taste things with our tongue. And with the air passing over the tongue, we can differentiate, if things go well together, or if they don't go well together. So I think from my earliest moments in the industry, I understood the importance of food and wine. Winemakers consider wine a food. We don't consider it as much an alcoholic beverage. It's kind of separate from wine should be consumed with meals, and all wine tastes better with food as opposed to on its own. So it's natural.
Question just popped into my mind. People, you go to a restaurant, you'll see someone smelling the cork or feeling the cork, and first of all, what are they doing? What are they looking for? And what should you do? There's kind of a clash there where some people say it's ridiculous to smell the cork.
It is fairly ridiculous to smell a cork unless you have such a super wine palate, and 1 in a million you're a person that you're really going to get much from the cork, because a cork will smell a little bit corky. Now there are corks that are bad, and normally you can tell if it's a bad cork, but not all people can tell. Very few people can tell, and it might smell a little bit bad. So I think the way it should be done, and is mostly done without the inhibitions of handing somebody the cork, as a sommelier or a waiter handing somebody the cork, and then it becomes, what do I do with this thing? Am I supposed to smell it? What is it supposed to smell like? You can just pour a little bit in the glass and smell it. And if it smells good, it's going to taste good.
Right. Now, another basic wine question is, why are some wines red and some wines white?
Well, all grape juice is clear. Grape juice has no color at all, except for 2 different grapes, very rare varieties. But red wine is fermented on the skins at a very warm temperature, and it's this warm temperature that extracts the color out of the skins. And red wine is made from red grapes, and white wine is made from white grapes. And it's just different tastes and different varieties of grapes.
What about years? When people talk about years, like 1994 is better than this year, or 1990 is better than a certain year, what are people talking about?
Well, the same thing they're talking about if you were to talk about a ski season, let's say, going to Colorado to ski. If it had a lot of snow, then it was probably a good year. With wine is bottled on the day that it was, the vintage date is the day that the grapes were picked. So a lot of the wines we have here, we have a 1993 Merlot, for instance. That means that those grapes were picked in 1993. And what you want to do is, if it's a good year, the wines will be better. Vintage years. One of the great things about wine, it's not like a whiskey or like a soda, in that you bottle wine by a vintage year, and years have their ups and downs. There are better years than others. So on an off year, you get maybe a pleasant wine, and if you have a tremendous year, then you would have a spectacular wine. And that's what makes collecting so interesting.
Typically, how much time elapses between actually picking the grapes and bottling it?
A simple white wine could be bottled within 6 months, and a particularly good wine that has to age a long time in oak and might require a lot of softening inside a barrel may take 3 years before it's bottled.
And is it the aging process that really accounts for the range? And you go to a wine store, and the prices could be as low as a $6 bottle of wine. You can go up to 100, 150, or
or even higher.
Sure. Is that all due to the aging process, how long it takes? Or?
Yes, and it also has to do with when a wine tastes the best. Now, some wines may taste the best a week after they're bottled, or within several months after they're bottled. But some of the spectacular wines that come out of really outstanding vintages, they may not taste their best for 40 or 50 years.
Right.
And that's what you're paying for. You're paying for the fact that someone has aged that wine for you, unless you've done it yourself. You know, that you've bought the wine and stored it properly for that amount of time.
Is it a mistake for someone, you know, a wine novice, say it's the holidays, you go in, you're buying your first bottle of wine for someone, to just gauge quality by price?
No, that would be wrong to gauge quality by price. I mean, if you're going to go into a fine wine shop, and then you have to trust your retailer, and you can ask the questions, and I'm sure they'll steer you in the right direction. But you know, if you want to spend $300 on a bottle of wine and you really can taste the difference, then I think that's a great thing. But if people can't, then there are surely enough wine at a reasonable price of very good quality.